And I guess we're just going to give it a couple of minutes to let everybody come in from the lobby. Hey, Will, is there a way for me to know how many people show up?
Yeah, if you go to People on the Chrome tab, you'll see how many viewers there are. And we had a lot of people in the waiting room, so I'm sure the number will go up as they connect.
Okay. I'm sorry, I can't see where the number is. Doesn't really matter.
Gotcha.
So are we still having people coming in?
Yeah, so right now we have 227 people, 227 viewers.
Great. Okay, we're going to get started. I want to welcome everybody. I'm so glad that you're joining us here today. I had a little bit of technical problem showing up, so I couldn't get logged in, nor could I share my PowerPoint. So I think we've got those things figured out, and we're going to be talking about grief today. So I have a lot of grief that we're not in person. I also have a lot of grief that we only have 2 hours. When I submitted this proposal, I thought we'd have at least 4. And with the topic we're covering, we really need 4 days, and we need to be with each other because grief needs community. So some of what we're going to be doing today is really exploring how can our internal system be a community when we don't have the community of people on the outside. So anyway, I think that I need to start with a meditation because it has been kind of upsetting to my parts. And I have to turn off the chat right now because everyone's saying they're freezing up, and that's going to upset me greatly. Not knowing that people can actually see and hear. So there are no handouts for this, but I will get my PowerPoint to Ashley so you can get it before the end. So it is true. Mercury is in retrograde. So if it's really choppy, I guess I would ask that you watch the recording. If it is too disruptive for you to watch it with it being choppy, Safari is the only one I could get into today to be here with you. So I just saw someone saying it's making their heart smile, so that makes me feel real good. So let's just take a moment and go inside and remind our parts the more space they give us, the more available we become to and for them. And just bring your attention to your breath, slowing it, inviting in space. Letting our parts know that we're not going to make them do anything they don't want to do. Everything is with choice and permission. And we're going to help your parts hopefully understand the process of grief more so that it will be less scary and more welcome. And in this virtual space that we're in, let's take a moment and really invite our vibration to increase, to expand. In our mind's eye, allow us to feel and see this community that's connected electronically right now. well over 200 of us coming together at the same time. And I would like to just name that as of today, there are 4,892,505 people that we've lost to COVID. And just for us to sit with that as a huge loss. So just take a moment and be with your parts in whatever way feels best to them in this moment. And as I come back, I'm going to ask Will, who is our tech person, if it makes sense for me to try to log in again, or is it too late for that?
I don't think that will have a big improvement.
Okay, you don't think trying to get into Chrome one more time?
You could give it a shot if you'd like to, but the recording will be clear. And if participants aren't having a good experience, they can try leaving and coming back. But it might be more disruptive than improvement.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to check, and what I'm going to do is just encourage people to watch the recording. That way you'll get this clearly. And so glad that you were here for the beginning of this and just bringing your energy to be with us. So I'll just start with an introduction. I have to get my parts to really calm down because this is bumming me out that we're having so many technical difficulties in the beginning of my presentation. So I suppose that's a bit of grief as well. So my name is Ann Cinco, and I live in Middletown, Connecticut, which is the lands of the Wangunk people, and they have actually been extinct for a couple of 100 years. I am cis, hetero, married woman, moving into my 6th decade on the planet. I practice earth-based spirituality informed by the universals of shamanism and Buddhism, and IFS has been my spiritual path. I chose this topic because of my own personal story with grief. I believe that I'm a therapist because of the grief that I experienced in my life. And I truly believe that grief is really the biggest piece of what we do in therapy, is to help people feel their grief, feel their feelings, and move through grief. And that in our mainstream Western culture right now, grief is greatly misunderstood, and that as the predominant culture of the US in the West have lost their grief skills. So the other reason that I chose this topic is because I was so profoundly touched by Bruce Weller's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, where he talks about the 5 gates of grief. So, the other book that really has inspired me is a book by Martine Prichtel, and it's called The Smell of Rain on Dust. And he talks about the relationship between grief and praise, that we have to be able to grieve, to praise life, to be in touch with our full authentic selves, that our grief is just testament to what's important to us and to the fact that we love. So those are the 2 of the biggest inspirations in doing this workshop. So what I thought that we would do is start by going over an overview of our time together. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint with you. Which takes time to pull up because so what we're going to do today is we're going to define grief, so we're all working from the same definition. We're going to take a moment and go through our family of origin and cultural influences. We're going to talk about IFS and its belief and how we understand parts in grief. We'll talk about the difference between grief and depression, and we'll talk about the 5 gates of grief. And then we'll talk about how we can create a culture internally and externally where we honor our grief and our sorrow. So that's what we're going to do today. And I know that we do need 4 days for this. So a definition of grief is that grief is a natural and normal response to loss. It's a process that is deeply personal, but it's also universal. And there are so many things that we have collective grief about. And that's why I brought up COVID, wars, these things that happen on the planet that we all feel in some way, shape, or form. So it's universal and personal. And grief is also a process. It's not just a feeling, it's many, many feelings in this process of grief. So it's our emotional suffering when we lose something that we care about, that we love, not just a person, but it could be anything. It could be a job, an expectation, a pet, it's a loss of anything. So mourning is when we have our grief that we feel on the inside outwardly expressed. And there is no right way. That is a varied, how we mourn is as varied as there are people. And frequently the way that we mourn is determined by our culture, our ethnicity, our families, and whether it's allowed to be outwardly expressed or not is determined by our belief systems. So mourning, this the idea of showing our grief outwardly. So in a perfect world, there is no rule book, no time frame, no judgment. Grief is as individual as a fingerprint. do what is right for your soul. In a world without burdens, that would be very, very true. But in our highly burdened world, we actually have a lot of judgments. And when we have judgments and we're afraid of grief, there becomes right and wrongs. And then our parts start to get extreme, and then they start to squash down and deny our grief. And then all the things that come out of us not feeling our feelings, all of our protectors jumping in and doing what they do. So the customs, rituals, and beliefs of a group to which we belong affect our experience of death, grief, loss, and bereavement. Some cultures are much, much better at allowing this process of grief to flow than other groups. I was brought up Irish Catholic, and the Irish are renowned for not allowing most feelings to be felt unless their happiness and positive things. So they would actually have keeners, people that were professionals at coming in and showing that outward expression in the morning to help other people get in touch with those feelings, get past the blocks to allowing their mourning to be more externally experienced. So IFS and grief. We're talking about internal family systems. So it's a system of parts, not just an individual. So we're going to best understand grief as a constellation of parts around our loss and sorrows. So it's not just one part that grieves when something happens. We may have a whole constellation of parts that have a whole bunch of different feelings about one issue or one loss. So I have found in my clinical practice that when I reframe what someone is experiencing as grief, it really gives us a new way of looking at it and a new way of understanding it. And actually, it allows parts to have more buy-in because they're putting less judgment on it. So frequently, grief looks like anxiety. It looks like depression. And if someone can name what they are experiencing and list why they feel the way that they do, they're grieving. So it can be a very powerful way to work in therapy is to reframe what people's parts are feeling as one of the processes of grief. In preparing for this workshop, I read that Kubler-Ross was very, very sorry that she let her stages be so well known because she agreed that there aren't just stages, that grief, this process of grief is very individual, and everybody doesn't go through every stage that she identified. I mean, she actually came up with those stages by working with people that were dying of cancer. And that people go through a lot of different experiences. And when we really look at it through the lens of multiplicity and begin to identify what parts are feeling the way they are and why they are, it's much more fruitful than looking at potential stages of grief. Okay. When we think about IFS, IFS is a model of parts that are stuck in extreme roles, which are our managers, our firefighters, and our exiles, okay? When we're grieving, it could be just a part that's having a feeling. that's grieving, not a part that is trying to either keep a feeling from coming up, which is a manager, or douse a feeling once it does come up, which is a firefighter. So they're responding to the burdens of the exile, okay? So grief might not be needing to deal with exiles at all. It may be just dealing with parts that have feelings. So I'm going to ask you to answer a couple of these questions. And take a moment. I'm going to ask you to journal. And then also, if you're asked for permission from your parts, if they would let you answer in the chat. And then Molly is going to read some of your responses so we can actually know that each other are out there with the chat. I can't even see the chat when I'm in my PowerPoint. So that also will help me know that you're out there as well. So the first one that I'd like you to journal about and then share anything in the chat that you'd like to is ask your parts what their relationship is to feelings. Your sorrow, joy, anger, love, hatred, envy, happiness, or any other feeling. What is deemed acceptable and what isn't deemed acceptable? And then ask your parts about being able to cry, allowing tears to flow. Is that something that your system will allow, or is that something parts won't allow? And then the third one is responding to the statement that grief requires weakness and vulnerability, that it's part of the grieving process. So just take a moment and answer those questions, listening to your parts and knowing that the beautiful thing about parts is that you may have polarizations coming up, parts that feel one way, that energize, parts that feel the exact opposite in the other way. So, what I'd like to actually, as you're kind of writing these, I want to go back because I looked up a couple of things around culture and responses to grief. And I'm just going to read a couple of these to you. Some cultures expect a dignified and quiet response to loss, while in other societies, mourners are expected to openly display their raw emotions. Emotions and grief may vary between cultures. Some cultures expect feelings of loneliness and sadness, while other cultures, people may respond with anger or rage. In some cultures, death is seen as an extension of life, where other cultures, it is seen as the end, that when you die, and there's nothing left. Western cultures tend to view death as a feared enemy that can be defeated by modern medicine and high fancy technology. And in Western society, it really has changed in the last 100 years, this whole cycle of life and death. I remember my mother telling me stories of when she was a child, that when someone died in the family, they would be laid out in the dining room, in the parlor of the house. And she would say that she remembers as a child running and not looking in at the dead relative that was being waked in the house. And then everyone would come to the house to be with the mourners. So there's this in our predominant Western culture, there has been this getting away from and making the process of life and death very, very distant from our daily lives. I read that the African concept of life and death is on a continuum of existence, with death as just being another state of being. So as you're thinking about these things, just pay attention to what is it that you learned in your culture about life and death. And Molly, if you want to share a few, from the chat, maybe starting with the first question, what's their relationship to feelings?
There's a lot of responses here. I'm not sure if they're organized.
Okay.
And it's moving as I'm trying to read it. Let me get a hold of it. All feelings are acceptable, though really challenging, sometimes when they're overwhelming. My parts let me cry. My parts love my feelings, and there's a part that judges also.
Mm-hmm.
One part prevents feelings, and there's a part that judges also.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, this chat moves pretty quick.
Yeah.
Inability to grieve or process unpleasant emotions can literally create disease. And so polarized, early grief covered with strength, and that is still the most vocal part. My tears come whether another part wants them to or not. I used to believe my tears were too much, but now I can stay with them. Crying can be a wonderful release. Inability to grieve or process unpleasant emotion. Oh, I read that one. Sorry. Crying can be a wonderful release. One part differentiates kinds of grief. Some kinds allow vulnerability and weaknesses.
Well, I hope that you're all out there able to read each other's comments also, so that, we don't want to feel alone when we're exploring grief. And I know that for our manager parts, their motto is never again will I ever feel, and you fill in the blank. So my guess is their reaction to weakness and vulnerability is part of the grieving process. They're like, well, no, we're not grieving then. Or we're not allowing anger, or we're not allowing envy or jealousy. Or we're not allowing tears because we got hit every time we cried. So again, everything that we're doing today and everything that you're starting to kind of let come to the surface of your awareness is a trailhead to learn about your own inner system. Anything else you want to share from the chat?
Yeah, there's a lot here, and
Okay.
yeah, beautiful. Like I said, I wish I could read them all. My managers can be quite cruel to me if I express anger, hatred, or envy. Science has found tears literally contain this is hard to control, this chat. Tears literally contain stress chemicals. So crying helps your body cleanse.
Also makes us tired, so we just want to take time and rest. I know that I had to do a lot of unburdening around my sensitivity and my crying because I was shamed for it. growing up. I could cry at the drop of a hat. So my face would go blotchy when I cried because there was this polarization inside about don't do it, don't let it be seen. And as I've unburdened that over the years, I can cry now without getting all puffy and blotchy. It really shows up very differently in my body. Okay, so I'm going to read you a poem out of a book called You Were Never Broken by Jeff Foster. It's a wonderful book. And this is the chapter of Let a Feeling Crack You Open. Here's the bad news. You can't get over a feeling. You can't get past it. You can't release it. You can't let go of it. You can't transform or transmute it. You can't even heal it. These ideas all come from the mind, not awareness itself. They are subtle forms of violence, sneaky ways of saying no to a feeling, hoping for its disappearance, its death. We learn to let go of letting go. We release the very idea of release. We heal from exhausting efforts to heal. We offer instead our simple presence, our non-resistant attention, our love. Here's the good news. In this field of presence, the feeling is no longer a problem, an enemy, an abreaction, a stain, a block to freedom or peace. It's no longer something's wrong. It's no longer negative. It's no longer unsafe, a threat. It's no longer unwanted, unloved, neglected child. You are now its guardian, its protector, its loving parent, its home. You do not have to heal from your feelings, you see. They heal you when you allow them to guide you back to your original wholeness, your loving nature, your breath, your rightful place on earth. So I highly recommend that book. So thank you, everybody. Keep those chats going so that people can scroll through them and not feel alone. This is something from Francis Weller's book, Grief Teaches Us about our feelings. Grief teaches us that pain and joy can coexist. Grief teaches us to be true to ourselves. So grief is the internal meaning given to the experience of loss. And I really wanted to spend a couple of minutes on this because human beings are meaning-making machines. So this is definitely determined by our family and our culture that we are in and grew up in, because this is the beginning of burdening, okay? The meaning our parts give our experience. So we're talking about grief, so we're going to talk about of loss. Our parts could give very constraining meanings to our experience of loss. This happened because I'm a bad person. If I was deserving, it would be different. I'm not enough. I don't deserve to grieve. So all the meanings that our parts get about loss can become the burdens and the blocks to our allowing ourselves the process of grief. So before we just get into the difference between grief and depression in terms of an IFS perspective, I would like to talk just a little bit about, again, mainstream Western culture, that we actually have grief shaming, that Dick wrote an article several years ago about don't look back, and he talks about our culture being one of, okay, you got 2 weeks to get over a major loss, and what's wrong with you? Why aren't you feeling better? Why aren't you happy? That we have very little tolerance for the time that grieving takes, and it's different for everyone, and it's dependent on what the loss is of somebody. So again, I just wanted to say it may not be a part that's stuck in an extreme role, and with what we are talking about, living in a society that either uses anesthesia or amnesia around the feelings around grief, they then do activate parts in extreme roles, our managers, our firefighters, and our exiles, which then become the blocks to our grieving. So just to sit for a moment and say, what is my capacity to sit with my sorrow? What happens when I feel sorrow? Do I deny it? Do I distract myself from it? Do I go eat something or drink something? Do I turn the TV on? Or do I bring a loving presence to it? And what needs to happen so that I can bring a loving presence to it? And what did you do in your family? When you were grieving as a child, how were you responded to? I'm just thinking about in my own family. A lot of times you'd hear like, don't give me those crocodile tears, as if, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. These messages that we get that the feelings associated with grief and loss are not acceptable. I remember at my father's funeral, there was a pride. Of course, I was a crying mess, so I couldn't hold that back. But family members like being proud of my brother because he really showed stoicism and strength. They called that strength. And I remember thinking how sad that was, that he couldn't shed a tear at my father's funeral. So he got a very different message about being able to mourn in public and what that's supposed to look like in my family's culture. So there's a really great book. If you don't know it, it's called It's Okay That You're Not Okay by Megan Devine. And she really does talk a lot about our inability to meet grief because of the culture that we live in, and talks about how we live in a society that has avoidance of pain. Like we try to avoid pain. We see pain as the enemy. In IFS, we like to say that anything that we notice, any feeling, any sensation, any bracing in our body can be a trailhead toward our healing. But many of us have learned to get away from that. Actually, the more extreme parts get as they go through generations, the more feelings become the enemy. And we see this in alcoholic families where feelings are not acceptable on any level whatsoever. It's basically the rule of thou shalt not feel. And then we see a lot of anxiety and depression when all of that gets tamped down. That's what is left in the system. So I'm just going to do a time check here. Okay, so IFS and depression. So just to give you the IFS way of looking at depression, because we're already saying grief frequently can look like the symptoms of anxiety and depression. And it's really important to differentiate depression, which is a coping mechanism of a part stuck in an extreme role. So it could be a manager, it could be a firefighter that is responding to another part's behavior in our system and is using depression to protect us. Okay, that's different from, I just lost my dog and I don't feel like I can get out of bed and nothing's making me smile and I haven't laughed in a couple of weeks and my heart feels broken. Okay, that's a whole bunch of parts that it looks like depression, but it's just grief. So to understand that in IFS, if we're dealing with, we want to differentiate, is this someone's grief or is this a coping mechanism of a part? And it's using the symptoms of depression to do that. Okay. And when we have identified depression as a coping mechanism of a part, then we want to work with a constellation around that, the part that's using depression, so that we can understand why is it continuing to do what it does. Now, in IFS, we know it may be because an exile is really trying to break free and be heard, so it has to tamp it down even more. Or there's a striving manager that is going to work you to death if depression doesn't come in and tamp you down. Maybe it's the only way your system will allow any rest. So to think about depression as a coping mechanism of a part, and it's operating within this internal system, it's responding to something else, some other parts in the system. So it's a relational process. I'm going to stop for a minute and just ask Molly if there's any questions about this so far.
Yes, and let's see. Can you speak about people who are grieving whose caretaking parts are too strong? How is the grieving process different for them? I have a client who's experiencing a lot of grief from past losses, recent loss of her dog, her anticipated loss of her 94-year-old mother. Her caregiving parts are too strong to step away. They keep her focused on others and help her feel good. How would you help someone with such strong caregiving parts?
So I would make the caretaking part the object of our love and attention, and work with its fears and concerns around what would happen if it stepped back and allow other parts to come into the light with their pain and their sorrow, and let that part know that we are going to build a safety container that can hold that pain and that sorrow. And then this part wouldn't need to work so hard to keep that out of her awareness. Other questions?
Yeah, you touched upon this a little bit before, but could you say a little bit more about what the time frame is from IFS perspective in comparison to CBT concept?
Yeah, so there is no time frame, okay? If it takes as long as it takes, people, let's say, that have lost a child, I say to them, you never have to get over this. It might be nice if you could reinvest in life at some point in time, but you never have to get over it. There are some things that there is no getting over. So I know that, DSM, complicated grief, is something that goes on more than 6 months. I see complicated grief as something that has legacy attached to it. And also it's a process of parts not allowing you to grieve. That's what complicated grief is. So just because someone lost their child and is never going to get over it, that's not complicated grief. That's normal. That's understood. And nor should we ever expect them to get over it. So this is what this is where we would go. Just ask the parts, what is their expectation of how long you should be grieving? And so that you can get them to relax back and not have this judgment of, oh, I've been grieving too long.
Thank you, Anne. That's all the questions in the Q&A for now.
Okay, good. And I'm hoping people really get this differentiation between grief and depression. That one is a process that we go through and is natural and normal, and one is an extreme parts coping behavior. Okay. So those are just my notes. Okay, so here are some more questions that I'd like you to journal on and then share in the chat. Anything, again, asking permission from your parts if you're going to make anything public. But the first one is, how did your family deal with loss and the feelings of grief and sadness? What was your family's expectations? You know, what were your family's rituals and ceremonies around loss? Did your family have any? Because that can be diagnostic to find out what are a family's ceremonies and rituals. Because let's say in an alcoholic family, sometimes those are the things that are lost because they turn into highly traumatizing events. And so that's important information that we can get from our clients as we're getting their histories. You know, what are the rituals and ceremonies in your family? And, you know, when did they stop? If they stopped, why did they stop when they stopped? And what are some of your earliest memories of grief and loss? And then how were you responded to in your family around those losses? And then this question, what did you learn in your family about, we kind of did that earlier with the other question about feelings, but which ones were acceptable, which ones weren't? And what have you learned and absorbed from the dominant culture you live in about grief? So we'll just give you a couple of minutes to answer some of those questions. Again, thinking about these as trailheads. And I just have to tell you that I have a part right now that is just wanting to have a hissy fit, that I can't see any of you, that I'm talking to my PowerPoint screen, and that feels like a huge loss to me right now. And I'm trying to deal with it. So,
ready for me to read some of these, Anne?
Yes, please, Molly.
Okay. Boy, this is quite the wrestling job here. Okay, sorry, I'm trying to get it. There we go. Don't tell anyone your stuff, including grief. My family suppressed grief. Jeez. I'm sorry. Can't get it to hold still.
Well, I'm glad to see everyone is responding, and I know it's hard to read them out loud.
You can't hold it still. Okay. Right. I'm going to miss some of these, but feelings were not discussed or often displayed. My mother express pity and anger at someone else in regard to a big loss. Wish they had, I remember when my mom's sister died, her only sibling, and she dealt with it in a private and secretive way. We were not allowed to go to her funeral, and she never talked about it. I absorbed. Sorry, I lost that one. I apologize, everyone. When my grandmother died, my father cleaned out her room while my mom was at the hospital. It was as if she were never there. The social distancing needs, oh, sorry. Someone's upset about the social distancing. There's lots of grief there. Yeah.
Touch in the
crying,
time of COVID.
Yeah. Crying was not allowed in my family. Grief and loss was not talked about. I lost my cousin, who was like a sister to me when I was 17. She was 18. There was no space in my family to talk or cry about this. Soft feelings were not approved of. When my brother took his life, when I was 14, my parents didn't talk about what happened or what he felt. Losses were totally ignored. My brother was born and died. I'm trying to get back to that one. Within 2 weeks, no one spoke his name or remembered him. I totally forgot about him until I was in my 20s. My family held wakes and funerals, but I don't remember anyone crying. I learned that if I grieve my pets outwardly, that means I can't handle having a pet. So that taught me to hide that grief so I could get it, so I could get a new pet. Wow. So many here, Anne.
Yeah. So I just want to thank you all and take some time just reading them, and also tend to your parts, because I'm feeling a little tearful just hearing the ones that Molly read out loud, and there's so much grief that we carry, and that gets, because we don't believe we can, our parts believe we can't deal with the pain and the sorrow, they do what they do to get them out of our awareness. And so I really believe that so much burdening happens because of parts' fear of grief and feelings. So thank you, everyone. So we're going to go into the 5 gates now of Bruce Weller's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And I wanted to start talking about shame as we were listening to several of people's responses. And I will go back and read the chat when we end, because I feel like I just probably need to just read all that and weep myself. So I found it so helpful to read this book because, in our culture, we basically only look at the losses that we have, and there's so many other levels where we feel grief. And highly recommend this book, and also really exploring the 5 gates yourself. And we're going to do that in the next hour that we have together. I don't know how many of you watched the performance last night of Hearts Wide Open, but it was so beautiful. I thought, well, there's my workshop right there in the performance. So if you haven't watched that, highly recommend. It's recorded. I highly recommend it because he really highlights the need to grieve to feel fully alive. So this is my paraphrasing of something that Bruce Willer said. The reverence that we meet anything with determines the quality of the outcome. So the reverence, the love, the self-energy that we meet our grief with will determine the quality of our healing. So our first gate of grief is everything we love, we will lose. And so this is a grief that arises in us when we lose a deep sorrow, a longing, an anger, and a depression, a denial. All of Kubler-Ross's, what we're just going to call feelings right now, and not a stage. And this can come at any loss, a life, a relationship, a home, a possession, a pet, your health, whether it's, I'm working with some people that are getting older, and just their loss of strength and coming to terms with some of their fragilities as they get older is a huge loss, and it sends us into one of these gates of grief. This first gate, it could be the loss of a job, it could be the loss of pretty much anything that was important to us, something that we loved. I know that I love this little vase that I had that I got from my grandmother, that she gave me when I was helping her out one day, and that it fell and broke, and I felt so much grief. I also had parts that were saying, it's just a vase, and trying to take me away from the pain. But it was what felt like a loving connection to my grandmother, and I really didn't have anything else of hers. So I felt a huge loss with the breaking of that vase. So the other difficulty about this gate, everything we love, we will lose, is that it is an essential teaching in our lives, that nothing lasts. It's what the Buddhists would say, impermanence, that when the stronger our attachment to something, the more we're going to get stuck in that grief process. So this idea that if we embrace that everything we love will lose, that is the gift, that nothing lasts, that it helps us live in our daily lives, really honoring and being more alive and more in connection, because we know that this day will be over, it will be lost, and that nothing lasts. So it's a grief that allows our heart to stay open and stay connected. I had a part that thought I would lose connection to my grandmother because that vase broke. But the opposite was actually true, that giving that grief attention connected me to her and connected me to the love that I felt to her. So it actually opened my heart. Another story that I just wanted to share with all of you is a couple of years ago, I lost a cat, and she was, I don't know, 2 years old. And she was one of 3 cats that I have, always going to be the kittens, because I found them in my barn. The mother never came back. I bottle fed them. So we ended up keeping 3 of the sisters, and she got hit by a car. And I had never grieved anything in my life like the loss of this cat. My heart broke. It just poured out of me. I screamed, I cried, I pounded the floor. And after having that experience, and it didn't just happen once, my part said to me, and here's the gift, we have felt that level of grief about so many things in our life, Anne, but other parts had not allowed it to be expressed. So that was my gift, that I learned about all these other things that I had that level of grief about, but it was kept out of my awareness and it was not allowed to be mourned in that same way. And it was from my unburdening that allowed me then to be with that sorrow. So we'll talk about this later, but I'd like you just to journal as we go through these gates, just a grief history, a loss history. If you haven't done one in your life, it's really a very helpful trailhead to write down all your losses, because then you can take a look at it and say, have I grieved this or not? And you could do it by, start in 1969, blah, blah, blah. You could do it any way you want. But even in this moment, to just write down any of your losses that your parts will let you have in words on print in front of you. And encourage your clients to do a loss history too, and then to explore their fears and concerns around doing a loss history or acknowledging all their losses. Second gate of grief, okay? When I was doing this, I'm like, this is a 4-day workshop right here. So the second gate, and the less well-known one as a gate of grief, is the places that have not known love, compassion, or warmth. And those are the places of shame inside of us. So these are the places inside of us that have felt untouched by love. And when we have places that are untouched by love, our parts make meaning about them. And when we're little, this is actually how burdens happen inside of us. When we're little and we're still egocentric and something bad happens and we don't have the secure attachment, we don't have the parental self energy to mitigate the impact of the event, then we are left alone with it. And our system has to help us survive. So what it does is it makes it about us. When we are egocentric, our brains are not developed enough to see beyond ourselves. So we make it our fault. Also in our brains, it helps calm us down if we know why something is the way it is. So by making it our own faults, we actually help ourselves calm down. This thing happened because I'm worthless. I don't matter. Obviously I wasn't worth it. I'm not important enough. All those things that we then tell ourselves that become the burden. And that becomes so painful, that has to be exiled. In come our managers and firefighters. So there's the shame, and then there's the avoidance of the shame. This is also the gate of regret. And regret, take a minute and think about, what does regret do? Regret can be a firefighter or a manager. It keeps reminding us of how we screwed up, right? How we didn't do what we wish we could, what we should have done, and that can get replayed again and again and again. I would say that regret is a complicated grief because it's getting to parts that are stuck in extreme roles. So regret can be, we have shame, which is the exile holding the feeling, and then we have shaming, which is what our protector parts do to keep us away from the feelings of shame. And I think regret is one of those. Usually it's fueled, our inner critics can really get a hold of regret. So shame when we feel shame, it ruptures our connection and it makes us believe we're unworthy of love or unworthy to grieve. I can't tell you how heartbreaking it is to reframe with our clients that they're grieving and then have parts come out and say, I don't deserve to grieve. I don't have the right to grieve because A, B, C, D, E, F, G through Z. Okay. And shame creates an internal state of self-hatred and exiling of which is deemed unacceptable or too painful to have in our awareness. So this is the gate that really speaks to the process of IFS, because IFS is a model that teaches us how to deal with parts that are stuck in extreme roles. We all have parts. All of our parts are not stuck in extreme roles. The ones in extreme roles are called managers, firefighters, and exiles. So they have a very different intention than just parts that have feelings. I'm going to say this again and again and again because I can't stress it enough. When an exile becomes unburdened, it's no longer an exile. It's just a part of us that has full range. When a manager is unburdened of their role of responsibility and caretaking, it's no longer a manager. It's just a part of us that has full range and is able to be authentically who it's supposed to be. Okay, so again, shame comes from not getting attended to in the way that we needed to be attended to when things happened. And then again, it's a process of trying to protect ourselves to actually continue to survive when we don't have that parental self-energy there. So developmental shame is those little things that happen over and over and over again that our protectors then can show us data of this is why we are unworthy. This is why we suck. This is why we're bad. Because look, that happened again and again and again. If we had any worth, that wouldn't have happened. The other form of developmental shame is when at a very, very, very young age, pre-verbal even, when we are met with a dysregulated other, when our mothers or our caregivers are dysregulated, we can't regulate. So that's the creation of a place of shame. Again, it can't be our caretaker because we need them to survive, so it has to be us. So that is a birthplace of a developmental shame, is having a dysregulated caretaker. That's a whole nother workshop. So any questions, Molly, about the second gate of shame?
Yes, there are. And one of them was what you just talked about. It was, but you said that's a whole nother workshop. The question was in regard to that, are there ways for internal mirroring like there is internal witnessing? Is that in the other workshop?
Absolutely. You're right on that, self, when you get parts out of the way, can be exactly what that young part needs. So yes, it can be that internal mirroring that needs to happen.
Okay. Can you, here's another question. Can you talk about community and cultural grief?
We're getting there. That's another one of the gates.
Okay. Are we going to have a Q&A at the end, maybe? Because some of these are kind of a lot of different topics. Or do you want me just to? Well, here's one that's applicable. Maybe can you talk about the loss of a father that a child doesn't meet?
just because you never met him doesn't mean you don't grieve him. That's a huge grief. It's something that you never knew, but there's a hole there, even though you've never met. Absolutely. That needs to be grieved and needs to be invited in. That's something that's, underground. Same with, again, anything deemed shameful will become a secret. And we heard this in some of your chats earlier about how your families, kept things secret. So if they were deemed shameful, then they don't get to be grieved, like abortions and miscarriages and, all those kinds of things that are seen as shameful, or want to be protected. If someone dies because of, let's say, they were drunk driving and the family has shame about it, it will become a secret. It won't be able to get talked about. If someone commits suicide and the family feels shameful about it, it may become a secret that's lost of future generations, even though they're still feeling it. That's another one of the griefs gates we're going to get to, which is legacy burdens. So I don't know if we're going to have time. Again, there's so much I want to cover, but we'll see if we can we can save a few minutes at the end for some of these Q&As. Is there anything else that, Molly, it pertains to shame right now?
No, not right now on the questions.
Okay, great. So again, any journaling you want to do of feelings that come up. Again, this whole conference has been so great, reminding us to pay attention to our bodies. Are you noticing any congestion, some tightening, some bracing? Just to give that some attention, because our bodies really are the first place we should look for some of our answers about what's going on with our parts. So the next gate, oops, talked about that. Well, this is still the shame. Shame closes the heart to self-compassion. And people that we work with that really have a hard time with self-compassion, we want to work with them around their shame. It means they have a lot of exiles that are going to need our attention, and they're going to need a lot of permission from the parts that protect them, letting them know that we can do this safely. That's the beauty of IFS, is we negotiate with the protectors to know we know a better way. We have a way where we can create this beautiful container of love and compassion so that everything that needs to get felt and everything that needs to get attended to can be attended to. Here's another just blurb that I thought was great from Francis Weller. The need exists for one to embrace these painful moments of life with compassion and allow oneself to see them in a new light, as having served as a guidepost along our journey thus far. For out of all the decisions made and all those left unmade, there exists the opportunity for both grace and growth that serves to move one further along the journey. So that's kind of what I just said. I had said it in IFS terms, that's in Francis Weller terms. Okay, so the third gate is the sorrows of the world. Okay, when I learned this, I just started crying, and my parts were like, this is a thing. Oh my God, this is a thing that self knows we are all connected. And I have parts that feel utterly devastated by what's going on in the world, what's going on with our Mother Nature, our natural disasters, the wars, the genocide. Parts just feel so crushed. And to know that this is a thing, this collective loss is something we all feel because we are all connected. We are interdependent beings. And when our parts feel like we can't, that we'll be crushed by it, they go into overtime of trying to block it from our awareness. That's why firefighter behaviors are so rampant in our world right now, that we either have to deny it or dull it or anesthetize it, or sedate it. We have to get away from it. And again, the more unburdening of that shame we just talked about, the more we're able to hold this huge sorrow that we feel. And, you know, when you work with HSPs, highly sensitive people, that is a thing. And people need to know if they are one, because I think everybody is, but some of us just have way more calluses than other people. It's really important to help them learn how not to be so overwhelmed and actually learn how to protect themselves while keeping their hearts open. Again, that's a whole nother workshop. The other thing that I really got from this third gate, the sorrows of the world, is that we could be feeling the sorrow of the planet, that we actually feel the Mother Earth's sorrow. We can feel the sorrow of the trees. We can feel the sorrow of the animals. We are also connected to everything. And this is something that, you know, if you've attended any of the indigenous workshops, that this is an ancient knowing, an ancient wisdom of us all being connected, and that there's a common sorrow, and that our hearts are broken, and they're supposed to get broken because this human life is really hard, and that we feel it in our bodies. And it's actually in feeling it, in allowing it, that we feel more connected, more alive, more human. And I got to tell you, my parts, I've been working on this for years, they rail against this. They're like, no way, because it's too big. And when they're with myself, they start to get like, I can hold this, and I can actually help heal it more from a place of not being so triggered by it. Because again, then all my energy goes into having tried to suppress sorrow. Any questions about the third? Again, all of these gates, we could do a 4-day retreat on each one. But Molly, any questions about this third gate?
Not any questions specifically about the third gate.
Okay. All right. The fourth gate, which is what we expected and did not receive, the loss of expectation. So for us to work with our parts to come to own that we feel grief when what we expect don't happen. I know working with especially divorce, this is a huge one, loss of expectation, not just in the marital relationship, but also in the family members. In most cultures, you make wedding vows, and wedding vows are to death do us part. And for many people, there is also the vow of monogamy, which most people can't keep. And so the expectation going into, let's say, a marriage is that they'll be monogamous and to death do us part. And at least in our culture, the US main culture, the divorce rate is at 50%. So 50% of all people can't keep those commitments. And then what do our parts do with that? They have huge grief around the loss of expectations. I thought I was going to grow old with this person. I thought we were going to be an intact family, that we would raise our children with, two parents in the family. So that I have found is huge with divorce, that needs to be spoken and allowed people to feel this. I call it I'll let you know when that file gets accessed again. The emotional healing of divorce. That's not what I call it, but that's close to the term. So, when we don't reach our dreams, I really wanted to be blah, 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 or see blah, blah, blah before. I'd always said that I always wanted to go to Africa. I'm a deep lover of animals, and I have parts that are afraid that the Serengeti, that all the animals in Africa are disappearing, and, animals become extinct every day. And I was like, I have to get to Africa before the year 2000. I had to cancel. I was supposed to go in February. In the summer, when COVID started growing again, I canceled my trip to Africa. So there's huge grief there. Like, am I ever gonna get there? So when our dreams and expectations and our personal visions of where we're supposed to be. I had a client, he's like, I was supposed to make $1 million before I was 40. Okay. Now I know that can be triggering some of our parts, but he had huge grief and felt like a huge failure because his father had done that, but he hadn't done that. So he felt a lot of shame. So a lot of our gates intertwine, and we feel them at the same time. So the other one is there is a deep knowing in our DNA that we should be cared for by a village. And that, especially again in our mainstream Western US culture, we have a huge isolation problem. People move away from their villages, from their families. There is not a sense of belonging to a village. And we know on a very, very cellular level that we're supposed to belong to something bigger. And this also can be felt when we're disconnected from our spirituality, that we know that we're supposed to be connected to something bigger. So it's a deep sense of not belonging, of being alone. So that's what this fourth gate is, what we expected and did not receive, and this loss of expectation and this loss of belonging. So Molly, any questions about this gate?
No fourth gate questions.
Okay. And are people writing chats about the gates as we go through them?
Yes, they are.
I'm glad they're sharing with each other. That makes me happy and feeling a little left out because I'm not seeing them. So, all right. So we're going to go to our fifth gate, which is a personal fave of mine. The fifth gate is ancestral grief, which is our legacy burdens. So that is grief that is in our bodies, in our cells, that are the sorrows and the pain and the trauma and the beliefs that our ancestors felt and couldn't process because they had to survive. So that it had to be exiled, it had to be pushed away, it couldn't be grieved or processed. And that comes down through the family emotional process. It comes down through our belief systems. It comes down through the adherence to the rules of shame, which I will put in the handouts in the lobby, because I think everyone should be aware of the rules of shame. It gets passed down in our DNA. I mean, some of the science that is now out there. I'm so glad that there's science, not that I really cared because I believed in this stuff anyway, but it can be found now in our DNA. I guess they did that. Everyone familiar with the mouse experiment, which was they took a mouse and they made it adverse to cherry blossom smell. And then they noticed that for the next 4 generations, their offspring were adverse to cherry blossom smell, even though they were never, they never went through the process of becoming adverse to it. So, and they found that actually got passed on in the sperm of the mice. So there's epigenetics and there's genetics about things that get passed down through the generations, the sorrow, the grief, the trauma. And I've always loved the statement, that which is not resolved repeats. And that is so true, that things that don't get resolved in one generation is the ancestors then are looking for the next generations to help heal that. And that's why I'm so passionate about helping unburden legacy burdens. And I'm so thrilled this conference that there's so many people that are loving and wanting to teach and doing legacy burdens, because I believe that we're actually helping heal the planet with every legacy burden that we can help unburden. So, any questions about this 5th gate?
No, not at this point.
Grief and sorrow. Okay. So those are the 5 gates. The first one being loss, which is the one we're all familiar with. Then these other 4 gates that can really inform our clinical practice as we're really looking at people's symptoms, being their inability to grieve and reframing what they're dealing with as grief, and helping people begin to go through the process of grief. And I highly recommend that you read that book, because there's so much to say about each one of these gates. Also, to journal. Sometime in the future, I want to do a 3 or 4 day retreat where we really delve into these and we are in community with each other to help unburden them. So, I want to talk about self and parts as an inner community resource and what we can do sometimes when we don't have the outer community for this, that we can always use ourself to create the container. And then we can also invite in our parts. We can also invite in our ancestors or our guides when we don't have the outer resource or community of people. That this is, especially in the time of COVID, resources that we can use when we may be on our own. So to be able to bear witness and show up to the pain and sorrow that's in our system, whether that's in our exiles or whether that's just in a part that is grieving. I had a PA several years ago, and he thought we should have 9 C's, and the 9th C should be companion. But that's what we do in IFS. We bring companionship to our parts and to each other so that we can allow our grief to flow. Francis Weller speaks about needing to be and have our adult self be with our grieving part. So he's speaking IFS, even though he doesn't know he's speaking IFS, in the grief process, for it not to be a place of being blended until the part that's grieving, that's feeling the feeling, knows that it's in the presence of an adult part or what we would call self. That makes a difference. Once that container's there and the part knows that it's being held, you could ask a part to grieve. So I know my parts need my full embodied expression to really feel gotten. I need to lay sometimes on the kitchen floor and sob. And after I lost my cat, I was telling you about, I was laying on the kitchen floor sobbing. And then I'm like, oh my God, when did I clean this floor last? And I go back to sobbing. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm laying on the kitchen floor sobbing. So that was an example of being blended, but also being aware that there was a container that was holding this deep sorrow. So for us to take on the belief that grief is vital and necessary, it's not just something that is a stage or a period of mourning, that it's not just to be endured, but it is part of the human experience. And I like vital and necessary. That it needs to be a conversation throughout our lives. In, again, mainstream US culture, death is taboo. We don't talk about death. That's one of the reasons that Halloween, my belief, Halloween is so big in this country, is because it's a way to talk about death without talking about death. You know, Hallowed Eve, it's the eve before the Day of the Dead. All Saints Day, if you're brought up Catholic. So, you know, we find a way, our parts find a way to express, even when we're trying to keep something out of our awareness. So a need and perspective, a revisioning what this process of grief is. As Francis Weller would call it, an apprenticeship with sorrow. Our approach, taking reverence to grief. And then I also loved how he said a right relationship with sorrow. And I just want to take a couple of minutes, we'll take a couple more minutes to go through a list of what I came through. How do we move through grief from a parts perspective? And then we'll have a little time for Q&As. And again, I'll make sure this makes it to the handout section. And hopefully we'll have that. I haven't printed out any or downloaded any of them, so I hope that they're available to us after the conference is over, because I don't know I'm going to have time to do that before, because I would love everybody else's handouts as well. So we need to identify the feelings, that reframe that we talked about, are a reaction to loss. We identify the parts, the constellation of parts that are in reaction to this loss. We name our losses. We let our parts know that they need support, and we might need to seek out that support internally or externally, and that it's the right kind of support, not going to the family member that go, oh, you're not over that yet, or what the hell's wrong with you, or snap out of it, or, you know, we're so, going back to collective grief, I wanted to say something, that if we're really uncomfortable with our own grieving feelings, our own sorrow, then when someone's reverberating, we want to make them feel better. And what we do is we basically give them the message to shut up. So we really want to be careful that we can be in that place of reverence to someone's grief, and not letting our parts try to somehow shut the grief process down. Also brings up this idea of, again, my head's not letting me have word retrieval today. Comparative grief. When someone shares your grief, hold your grief. If you really want to support them, don't start telling them stories about your grief and grieving and losses. That really does, that gives the message to shut up and close down. Educate about feelings. I think that in therapy, we need to do feelings 101. There is no moral meaning to feelings. Feelings are just part of being human. They move through us. They're not right or wrong. They give us information, and frequently we'll find that that's where burdens are, because parts made meaning about what they were feeling, and that's where it gets stuck. Work with protector parts that have fear of feelings and overwhelm. Find out, just ask, what does this part that's feeling this deep sorrow need? Be really curious, ask them about it. To know that we need to share our stories, our parts need to share their stories and their feelings. And the more comfortable you get with IFS, start inviting group therapy to happen among parts. You know, let's say there's one loss. I have to tell you, I lost my father when I was 18. And that has been one of the most popular things that shows up in my therapy. And I have this part that goes, this again? Because there's so many levels of loss associated with the loss of my father, and then how my family didn't deal with it. And then what my protectors did and all the acting out that they did because of the loss of my father. It just, blossomed into all of these gates. So encourage group sharing amongst parts. Always check for polarizations. When something's strong, it means there's something that's strong in the opposite direction. Let's see. Just to know and to educate parts about, grief has chords that connect us to our unresolved grief and fear of future losses. So we may have to, anxiety might be, and anxiety can be about failure, but it also can be about fear of future losses. It also can be about, my life has just irreparably changed. It's about ambiguity. I don't know it anymore. I don't know myself anymore. So to honor that kind of anxiety. Educate parts about the grieving process and what to expect. We can't control this process, and trying to shut it down robs us of our life energy. Mourning takes time. There's no limits. One of the rules of shame is to compare yourself to others. So you want to really help parts not compare your grief to other people's grief and how other people do grief. It's a totally personal experience. Spend time intentionally grieving. Allow and encourage parts to feel more than just sorrow, more than just sadness, because there's so many feelings that go into the grief process. And to let parts know, if they allow the unfolding of this process, that grief does lessen. That's the whole purpose of it, is to let us feel what we feel so that we can feel joy and feel more alive, and that we then adapt to, over time, what we've lost not being in our life anymore. And again, the grieving allows us to feel more connected, not less connected. And to take self-care seriously, because self-care is those things we put in place to help us in our grief. We all want our grief validated. We don't want people to fear it, nor try to fix it. Just acknowledge it. I thought that was a beautiful saying. So this is a blank screen because, again, this is a whole nother workshop, but to bring in ritual and ceremony to aid in the process of healing. That I can't underscore this enough. Ways in which, if you do an unburdening, if you can go do it in a concrete way, use a fire pit in your yard, bury, go out and just when it's windy here today, just ask the wind's permission to take it away, to bring in more ritual and ceremony in your life. Ritual has been around since the dawn of humankind, and its purpose is to help us adjust and adapt to change. That's why we do ritual. And it also helps us change. So just wanted to put in that plug for ritual and ceremony. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And we have a little bit of time for Q&A.
Wonderful. And there's a lot of questions.
Okay, I'm going to stop my share.
Do you want to go through them or have me read them?
Could you go? Because I'll get lost. I totally get sucked in.
Okay, so can you talk about the second gate, how that can happen for adult exiles, different from childhood exiles? Shame and regret of mistakes as an adult that aren't necessarily related to childhood exiles and or attachment.
Absolutely. It's the same process. We work with the protectors to hear what their fears are concerns. And usually when it's an adult exile like that, you have to deal with the inner critics because they're the ones that are really going to town. So that's probably one of the protectors that needs to get addressed, self-loathing, and find out what they're afraid would happen if they didn't do that job of regret, and then you go to the exile that they're trying to protect, which can be an adult.
Yeah. Okay.
And there are probably cords then to also lead to the child exile. That's usually it's a both and, because when we have that burdening in childhood, some shaming, some burden from childhood, those are the cords that then allow that burdening to happen in adulthood.
Okay. The third gate, how about clients reacting to the BLM and Indigenous wounds in the past few years? I'm in Canada, and the finding of mass graves during COVID-19 has been overwhelming for so many clients.
Absolutely. And what I would say is we can help people individually, but we need to come together as a huge collective in truth and reconciliation rituals, because that's just, we need to do it collectively. Unburdening.
Yeah.
That is.
Another question about the gates. I'm confused. Are you saying that the 5 gates of grief are not grief?
Yes, they are all ways in which we become aware of our grief.
Okay. Can you talk?
If we put it in IFS language, the 5 gates are our trailheads.
Okay. Next question. Can you talk about self's relationship to grief? Dick says that self can grieve.
Well, I disagree with Dick. I don't think that self grieves. That I believe that parts grieve, and self is the compassionate witness and the compassionate companion to the grieving part.
Okay. My client thought he had set up his life to be as he had wanted it. His wife and his children don't meet that expectation. Is this a grief issue?
Yes, it is a grief issue. It's there's probably the grief of the gate of shame, that and for me that would require my parts to get out of the way so that I could be in self with him, because I would have parts that wouldn't like him because of that presentation. So
Can you
that's a grief.
can you speak more to the chronic health conditions related to grief?
Well, there's huge grief around diagnoses and loss of health. And that is the entryway into many of these gates. One is loss of expectation. You lose your sense of innocence when you get a diagnosis. You can feel betrayed by your body. You may have a lot of shame depending on your beliefs around disease. So there's a lot of gates of grief when there's just the loss that you have from being sick. So many of the gates.
Okay. Curious what you say to someone or a client when they share a loss.
I would say, I'm so sorry, and I really would like to hear more about that, and I would like to hear what's going on inside of you because you shared that loss with me. I'd like to hear all of your parts' perspectives around that.
Can you please talk about, oh, I'm sorry, we did that one. Examples of ritual possibilities for those of us and our clients who are very unritualistic.
Well, many years ago, before when I was a young therapist and before I knew IFS, I was a Gestalt therapist, which was about just basically getting up and moving around and doing stuff. So you burning and burying, okay? That's what we do. When you lose someone, right? We cremate them or we bury them. In some cultures, like in Tibet, you could also have a sky burial where you get chopped up and put on a mountaintop and the birds eat you, or you get chopped up and put in the river and the fish eat you. But those are less well-known ways of, most people understand this burning and burying. So those things are pretty well accepted. So my first job out of grad school was at the first women's drug and alcohol center here in Connecticut. And I had women burying things, and we would have little fires and write them on paper and burn them. So those would be the two most common I would encourage people to do if they're not ritualistic.
Yeah, okay. Next question. How do you assess when depression or grief is present in a system, especially when both might show up in a part at the same time?
Well, again, that we get to that by asking the questions we ask in IFS. We find out what is the intention of the part. If it has a protective intention, then we know that it's a part stuck in an extreme role. Okay, if it's through asking and learning more, we hear that it's in relation to a loss, then we know that we're dealing with grief.
Okay.
And by the way, we don't medicate grief. You don't want to medicate grief because that will stop the process. Depression medication might be helpful to help someone deal with it. So it's important, if you're someone that recommends medication, make sure that you're not recommending that because someone's grieving.
Next question. I'm wondering about the distinction between regret and guilt. I had thought about regret as acceptance of responsibility without shaming, while guilt is having a burden of shaming in the system, often learned in childhood.
And I guess it would depend on your definition. I understand regret as something that we're not in acceptance of, that we feel badly that we didn't do it. We didn't do something that our parts wanted us to do it differently or be different. So I guess it would have to go to your definition. Maybe you hold, a different definition of regret. Because if I held that definition that you read, then I would see it different than guilt, and I would call that guilt.
Okay. Can you please describe specific strategies for responding in the moment to a client that is experiencing a recent loss and in session is blended and experiencing their grief, where we engage in implicit direct access? Is there a point at which we explore earlier influential losses, beliefs, or trailheads?
Absolutely. But in the moment, and this is something that I do it's unconscious, is usually my hand goes over my heart. And I just say, I just want to slow us down for a minute, because there's so much, I feel so much grief right now in what you're saying. And I really want to honor that. And I'm wondering how your system is responding to me saying, let's slow this down and let's give this lots of space.
Okay. Is that what you are saying? I hear you saying that sometimes there is no healing of parts that are grieving, loss of a child, perhaps also the third gate, losses and sorrows of the world, which are ongoing. I hear that these grieving parts can be held by the self, and that is an ongoing process. There is no end point. Is that correct?
So the healing happens in allowing the flow of grief. So that's why we want these parts to be held, whether it's by your community or by self, because that in and of itself is the healing. Have you ever heard the saying, a shared grief becomes half a grief? So it's the unburdening happens in the witnessing and the holding of it.
Okay. So Anne, we've got 2 minutes left. Do we want to keep doing questions, or do you want to do some closing offers?
Yeah, I think we should do a closing. So I just really want to thank you all for showing up, and I'm feeling a little calmer that the technology isn't working, and I hope some of you actually heard my presentation live without total interruption. And those of you that can watch it wanted to be here and couldn't, because I know that I had to leave some workshops because they were way too choppy and my parts wouldn't let me stay because it's just too distracting and annoying. So I'm glad that there's a recording so that you can watch this without that technological difficulty. And why don't we just take a moment and go in, taking a really deep breath, exhaling, and just sending love and compassion and light to any of those places inside that are grieving. Inviting them to feel the energy of all of us here today. And thanking them. Making any level of commitment that you can to come back to any of the trailheads that you became aware of today. And I hope that all of you seek out some support for your grief whether it's from your internal community or your external community. And hopefully once COVID is over, I will be providing a lot more of this external stuff when we come back together in community. And also, let's find people to help with the healing of the planet, that truth and reconciliation kinds of unburdening that needs to happen from the years of pain. Just sending a lot of love and compassion to all of your grieving parts and all the grieving parts in the world. Thanks, everybody.